So this last session, and thank you for staying, for this last session. Um, as I was saying in the very beginning of today, that one of the main motivations to do this, to organize these series of discussions is because of teaching, photography, this subject that is, in a way very elusive. Just taking into account the many ideas and discussions that happened over the last 2 days. So, it's a point for us to kind of reflect on, the not only the purpose of, teaching photography, but also, the changing nature of this medium that we're, trying to, teach students. So I really would like, towards the end, there'll be a lot of time for everyone to, contribute ideas or to ask questions and to participate. So I hope that you can, join us in this discussion. So I'd like to welcome Janine Olsen, who is our moderator. Again, the bios for all the speakers will be on the projection. And Alan Frame, Becca LB, and Sante Chang, who I'm so glad that we can put together this panel for today. So thank you.
So hi, my name is Janine Olsen, and I am going to moderate this, hopefully so that we can have a discussion where we give an introduction. I'm proposing some questions, and then how many people in this room are photographic educators? Okay, as suspected. So, I think that there's a lot that could be talked about in this room, and Arthur and I, our colleagues, and we were speaking about, like in the context of this conference, having a space to talk about what it is that we do when we teach photography. And so that's something that we're going to try to do here. And I just wanted to thank you for coming, and this has been a really great 2 days. I'm an assistant professor here, and I've been in my position for, this is my 3rd year. I'm just going to give an introduction myself. I've taught in a lot of different institutions. I've taught sculpture, I've taught film production, I've taught video production, and now I'm teaching photography, which I've also taught. So, and in terms of teaching and pedagogy, I'm kind of committed to feminist ethics, supporting students' inquiries into social justice, queer and racial politics, interrogation of structures like class structures, and I hope that as an educator I do support these conversations and think about how they're a part of what happens in photographic work. I wanted to talk a bit about Parsons. The department is sort of broadly based. Our photography department is both fine arts, it supports commercial practices. We have people in training as doing fashion work. We have people in training doing editorial work, people doing computational photography, so the beginnings of that. And we are a distinct program within the larger division of art, media, and technology. So there's, I think something that has happened a lot is that photography is an area within fine arts. In the context here, that's not the case. So I think that in a way we amend that, or we sort of deal with that in terms of having a fairly broadly based program. And we're always trying to figure out how to respond to technologies, and also how to respond to the culture, the image culture in which we live in. So that is somewhat the context. We have about 275 undergraduate students. It's in a 4-year program. It's direct admission. Next year we move to a 3-year program with a first year, like a Parsons-wide first year, more broadly based kind of foundational program. So that's actually going to change our department. And I would like to think for the better. And for just change is change. So we also have a graduate program, an MFA. It's a low residency, which doesn't, I think if the director is here, he would say it's not so low residency. But it's summer intensive, and there are approximately 30 students in that program as well. It's a wildly ranging program. We have students who are committed to social justice work. We have students who want to shoot fashion work, and they're all in the same rooms, and it's really interesting. And I couldn't say that we have a direct camp or canon, or singular canon. Maybe we could say we have canons. So, and that is a basic introduction. So I'm going to have the three of them give introductions to the contexts in which they teach and how they think about teaching as well. And Alan's going to show some images. And then I had proposed some questions earlier on, so we'll come back to those questions. So, okay, thank you. Song?
Oh. Hi, my name is Song Tate Wrong, and I want to thank Parsons and Arthur for inviting me to speak today, and I apologize for any slurring of speech or bad use of grammar. So, ironically, I actually teach in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication at New York University, and my teaching is in fact not technical at all. I teach critical theory and media analysis and photo history, so my approach is a little bit different from Janine's and Becca's and Alan's. The other hat that I wear is as I'm the gallery director at Milk Gallery, which is where the BFA show will be this year for Parsons, so we're very happy to have you guys. And the third hat I wear is as the workshop director for Magnum Photos. And while these seem like three different roles, they're actually very well entwined. So within the university, as you know, NYU's down the street, and we're Research One University with all of what that entails. But my course specifically is called Photography in the Visual Archive, and it examines the role and history of photography within the historical landscape of media and communication. And so this course introduces students to the social and cultural histories of photography with an emphasis that's placed on what the accumulative meaning of visual archive is and how images relate and establish cultural territories across a variety of texts and media. We also investigate the different mimetic strategies from Western and non-Western traditions with an emphasis on histories of looking. And so the focus of this work is applying critical theory to photographic production and consumption. So a big emphasis is placed on how viewers make meaning from the images that we as practitioners make. Which actually leads me to this idea of praxis, which is what the focal point of my teaching is, and which I think should be the focal point of a lot of photographic education. So how do we take this enormous amount of strong theoretical work that is being done in photography, and how do we apply that to the practical aspect of teaching photography? And I hope that we can explore that idea through this panel. And so that's what I do as a teacher in the university system. When I come out of NYU and I work with Magnum, it's a very different structure. We run two different kinds of programs. One is a 1-week intensive shooting-based workshop where you work with a mentor from Magnum, usually a well-established photographer, and you're given an assignment to shoot over the week, and it's really about intensive shooting and daily critique. So that's a very much practice-focused workshop. The other aspect of the Magnum workshops is this series that we call professional practice. And the professional practice series is usually a 2-day program where students pay a tuition, and there's 10 to 15 different speakers that come and review the work, and they also tell you how to be a professional photographer, how you go about proposing projects to universities or galleries or institutions, how you build a budget, what intellectual property actually means. So this is, a little bit of the business side of photography, which I think is really, really important. And so one of the questions that Becca raised, and then Alan and Janine sort of really hopped into the conversation is, and what is our responsibility to our students, right? I mean, what do we owe our students? And I think that I have a few ideas, and so I hope we can explore those through the panel.
Next is Becca LB.
Hi. Okay. I'm Becca LB, and I teach at City College, which is part of the CUNY system. It's on 138th Street. So often when I say City College, they're like, which one? And I'm like, City College. Which one? City College. Just to give a little bit of an idea of where I'm teaching, most of you know the CUNY system. And so it's a large school. We just got on-campus living like a few years ago. So most of my students live off campus. Many of them come from the outer boroughs, and some of them come from New Jersey or upstate. So some of my students travel about 2 hours to get to school, which I feel like is important to mention. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the department that I'm teaching in, because I'm teaching in an art department. We don't have a photography department. We don't have a photography major. And so to let you know what makes up our department, where photography is just a little part, is we are an art history, studio art, electronic design and multimedia, art education, and yeah, that's it. So we have an MA and two MFA programs, which I'll mention in a second, a BA in studio art. There's actually not an option to do a BFA in studio art. So I teach photography students within a BA structure for the most part. And then let's see, I don't know, the art education one, I don't know what the degree is actually. But anyway, so in the MFA program, I'm not really going to be talking about it when giving kind of this brief introduction, but we have two MFA programs that are both interdisciplinary. One is a studio art MFA, which has been more traditional mediums, and then there's one that's actually a new program that started this year that's digital and interdisciplinary art practice. So it's specifically students who are ready to work together, have a research-based practice, and consider technology with their work. So photography students are within both of those programs, and so I actually teach within both of those MFA programs within the same department. So when I was writing this introduction, I started thinking about my students and thinking about who are my students, and I started feeling very uncomfortable trying to summarize them. So brilliantly, I taught this morning, and so I asked them to summarize themselves. And so what I'm going to be doing is talking a little bit about one specific class that I teach. But to give you an idea of photography at City College, we actually do run it, I would say, somewhat like a program. We have a sequence of classes that students should take. We treat it very seriously. We have two full-time faculty members when we both co-direct. So I also co-direct with Patterson Beckwith, who is my colleague. And then we have a full-time lab manager who also teaches, Maria Politterhaus. We are hugely reliant on adjuncts. And so we have 12 adjuncts in our area, just photography alone. And I also do the hiring within that area. So not only do I feel very responsible for what I do in my class, but also who's teaching my students as well. And the well-being of those faculty as well, which is complicated. So with my class today, I teach a range of classes. We have traditional, digital. Most of our stuff is surrounded, most of our courses are surrounded by technology. So we have Photo 1, which is Introduction to Silver Gelatin still. We have digital classes. But I am going to be talking about my most advanced class, which students can take up to 4 times. And it's a class where students are making one project throughout the whole semester, and they're actually investigating their own interests as we have a pretty intense, constant dialogue about their projects. And let's see if I need to say anything else about it. Oh, there's also an important professional development component. I don't have a budget for my class, so I rely heavily on my peers and my community to come in and talk to my students. I bring them to MFA programs, residency programs, to different artist studios so that they can actually see firsthand and hear about different professional paths that individual artists have had. So I asked my students this morning and I've never done this before, and it was actually really interesting. So mind you that this is the most advanced class that you can take, and at least half of them have taken this class before. So when I asked them, these are just some basic statistics. I had 10 students who showed up, 2 were absent. Half of them were seniors, all of them are art majors. All but one would consider themselves concentrating in photography. Actually, when you ask them what their major is, they'll say photo, and I have to correct them. We don't have a photo major or a studio art major. All are full-time students. 6 have jobs. Half are over the age of 22. Half went to high school in New York. Half of them are children of immigrants. 3 of them are citizens from countries other than the U.S. 6 plan to stay in New York. 6 plan to go to an MFA program at some point. 6 came from other majors, including advertising, psychology, music, biology, and engineering. 2 have already received associates. One of them received an associate's from LaGuardia. I don't know if anyone teaches there, but we get fantastic students who come there after having a very full photo education and getting their associates. And then none of them, and this one was shocking to me, and this is something that I hope we talk about, none of them said they don't take photography because of the cost of the medium and the classes. And that was actually really surprising to me, because I have encountered when advising students are like, oh, I can only take one photo class because it's too expensive to take more than one. So that was something that was surprising to me. Half of them use social media to share their projects from my class, which I also didn't know. And so then I asked them what they thought my teaching philosophy was. We write these teaching philosophies, especially with full-time jobs. You have to write them and to get positions. And so I wanted to ask them what my philosophy was. I've been at the same job for 9 years. I'm an associate professor. And so I felt a little disconnected from that text. And so I asked them what they thought my teaching philosophy was. And I'm just going to list them because it was really interesting to see what they said. So they said that I have an emphasis on individuality and each unique perspective of the individual student. I teach them to be citizens, not students. Finding individual voices and individual perspectives through their work, and also teaching critical thinking about their own work, the work of others in the world around them. These are their words, not mine. How to see and talk about work, how to create self-motivation and discipline, awareness of the real world, preparing for outside of an academic environment, exposure to what it is to be an artist. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention, which I thought was really funny, is they said allowing each individual class to create the content. And they were like what you're doing now, you're asking us to tell you what what your teaching philosophy is. And so the one thing they didn't mention is it's really important for me to help build community in the classroom and to create an environment with peers, and also to help prepare them to have it's almost like cultivating confidence to be able to go out into the world and do things. I went to 2 public schools, and that's something that was very important for me to learn when I was getting educated. That's it.
Thank you, Becca. And next is Alan Frame, and Alan has some images too. So,
Oh, wow, Becca, it sounds like you're doing a great job. It's great to be here, and I look around and see so many talented people that I know and so many great teachers. Feels like a think tank, and I hope that you'll hit us with some great responses and questions, because I'd love to hear what you're thinking too. So I thought I would bring my context with me through a few slides, because I just came from a class that I teach at SVA, which is a senior photo thesis class, and I have 15 students. Supposed to have about 12, and I took a few extra. Today we were rehearsing for their senior presentations next week, in which they, all, however many of them there are in the senior class, maybe 120 or 30, will get up in front of each other and take 4 minutes to show 20 images and talk about them. And they really do need to practice this, because they were completely at a loss, most of them, when they first started last week and this week, to actually get up and formally present themselves. I've been telling them that they have been pushing my limits of empathy this year totally with the work that they're doing. It's been the best class that I've taught since I've been at SVA, and I started in the late 90s. And I thought I just wanted to share with you, to ground this discussion in the reality of the work that we're responding to. And I say responding because I feel like, I teach in 3 places, and what do? I'm responding and responding and responding, and that's very stimulating, and it's also exhausting in a good way. I just participated in a search committee at Pratt, and one of the things that came up in talking to applicants was, when do we all make our work when we're responding to this degree? And a lot of people just said straight out, in the summer. And that's another thing. It's this interrelationship, and what we're giving and what we're getting, and So I just wanted to present what yeah, I also wanted to mention, David Wojnarowicz wrote, a series of incredible monologues that were derived from conversations that he had traveling across the country when he was in his early 20s. And, the characters are so theatrical, but he didn't write them for theater. He just wrote them to remember them. And one of them, I remember, was this waitress in the Southwest who talks about her life as a waitress, of experiencing and experiencing and experiencing and wanting to be done with that and step back and take a breather. And I feel like I'm due for a sabbatical. But anyway, this is what I'm responding to on a weekly basis, and this is just about 6 of the class of 15. So I'm going to start with Ilona Swark, who is from Poland. She's 26, and she was in the New York Times Sunday Magazine about 2 weeks ago with this other series that she's done, but this was from a series, no, actually it's from this series, the Cowgirl series. She also just won World Press Photo Portrait Competition. And I just wanted to drop her into this to sort of think about what the other students are dealing with as they're making projects and thinking about going out into the world. And here's one of their fellow students who is older, she's 26, who's already getting this kind of attention. To have her in the class is really interesting. She's more reserved than you would expect, but in sharing her story about how she got published and how she got some of these opportunities, you realize that there's this incredibly determined and persistent person behind this work that she's sometimes very uncomfortable talking about. Next. This is work by Christopher Smith, who, in practicing today, told us that he was from, we already knew that he's from this small town in Missouri in the Ozarks, but I didn't know that it was the meth capital of the country, according to him. And he was going back there in the fall, doing sort of drive-by, kind of just quick research pictures of places and environments that he remembered from his teenage years. Recently, this semester, he started painting on portraits that he was doing because he has a background in painting. Although I think the way SVA's photo program is set up doesn't really encourage that kind of interdisciplinary exploration, but he happens to be as interested in painting and cites Fluxus and happenings as well as Lucian Freud as influences. This is a self-portrait that he did in response to encouragement by his mentor, Philip Gefter, who I guess got into his story and encouraged him to do a self-portrait dealing with something from that background in the Ozarks. Next. SVA has this program for its seniors where they invite a huge number of people in the photo world in New York, and some of you are those mentors who meet with the students several times and give them feedback, and sometimes it's more of a meeting than others, but that's also interesting for me to deal with because, as their primary thesis teacher, then suddenly they're, getting another kind of feedback from somebody else, and sometimes it's great and I welcome it, like in this case, and sometimes it's like, but, I think that's what the world is. You get a lot of different kinds of feedback and you deal with it. And this is just, another portrait that he did with a friend. Next. And the next one is by Sophie Ermine. That's a self-portrait. She is doing a project about this syndrome that she has called trichotillomania, in which she feels compelled to pull out hair from any place on her body. It's hair that disturbs her to see. And it could be from her head or her leg or wherever. And for her to make work about this and share it was a big coming out, not just to her family, friends, and people at school, but also and primarily to herself, of owning this compulsiveness that she's still you know, mired in. It's very hard to break that, apparently. Her mentor, interestingly enough, was Eleanor Carucci, who I thought was a great call. And next. You know, and she's shared the blood and guts of this with us. I think the most interesting point was when her parents came to the mentor show, and, you know, they really saw this work and gave her feedback on, you know, their experience of her and this syndrome. Next. And this is work by someone from Ecuador named Stephanie Molina, who, through a friend, found herself living in a household with 2 elderly Holocaust survivors in Brooklyn who are in their 90s. And after she lived with them for a while, the children, you know, the adult children of this couple moved them into a very sterile high-rise apartment, thinking that would be better for them somehow. And the first pictures that she did were next in that apartment. But now they've moved back to the apartment and neighborhood that they spent many years in, and they're much happier. And she has moved there. So she's a roommate dealing with those difficult boundaries, I think, of living with your subject matter in a documentary project. She's become very close, and you know, their communication has been great, even though the woman, you know, has more problems directly communicating verbally, but they exchange notes. You know, a tough, intense project, and she's done a prolific amount of work and is turning it into a book. Next. And this is another project, Nick Blumenthal, who, a gay guy who was having a Facebook flirtation with somebody that he thought was a guy who turned out to be a trans man who hadn't really come out to him about that. And when he realized it, was sort of jolted by that, having gotten to know this person very well, except not knowing that fact, got interested in making work about trans men in particular. And so this is part of a series. And finally, Jess Badgley, who collaborates with her boyfriend to make her work building unusual cameras. The one that she's using for this picture of her brother is a camera made out of a tree stump. It's an 11 by 14 camera in a hollow tree stump with a lens with an 18-inch focal length and an f-stop of 3.2 that was taken from an old projector, and it weighs 52 pounds. And what she's been doing with it, well, is a lot of outdoor portraits. She's from rural Pennsylvania, and she commutes to SVA from there. So she's been doing these portraits of her brothers and her father and her boyfriend outdoors. And lately, she's concentrated on her teenage brother, whose best friend recently committed suicide by throwing himself in front of a train. And in this picture, he has found a keychain with that friend's name on it and is burying it in the yard. And she said that he's been spending all of his time outdoors, just recovering, going through this process of grief, and that participating with her and making photographs about it has been healing. And that, yeah, so I just, you know, when I'm talking about responding, you know, the intensity of the work that, you know, people are doing at this young age is, you know, impressive and really interesting to me. And I think, you know, I've heard so many times people try to characterize a certain generation as being empty or vapid because they're on the computer all the time, or because of whatever, you know, which is that like age-old tendency of trying to create a distance with a generation that we don't understand. And you know, I'm constantly reminded that, in fact, I feel like it's the opposite, that, you know, every year I feel like people are dealing with more and more serious topics and being able to make work about them and trying to create a dialogue about them. So on that note, I'll give it back to Janine, and I just want to say Janine is one of my favorite people in the world. Jack of all trades and a master of all of them, so competent, such a great artist, and I really appreciate your inviting us to do this with you.
Well, full disclosure would be that Alan was one of my graduate school faculty 15 years ago, so, and we've always kept in touch. So I'm going to go back to some of these questions that I initially first put out, which the first one seems a bit trite right now. And I think at some point, fairly quickly, it would be interesting to get your feedback as well, or if you wanted to interject anything, to not think about this as a one-way discourse. So, and I guess I'll just put these questions out, and if you feel like after the three of you have just said something and you feel like you've completely forgotten something, this is your chance. And so the first question I had sent to them was, how do you approach teaching photography? Like, what do you think is important for you to impart to your students? Song, you have a different way of thinking about this, I think.
Oh, okay.
But you could answer this, because you don't teach practice, it
That's
brings
right.
you to your praxis point.
Yeah, it's theory, you know, so I could speak more to the work I do with Magnum to make a little bit more sense. So we do these, I do these workshops with Magnum photographers, and as you can imagine, the bulk of these students are interested in reportage or fine art photography per se. I was struck a few years ago when Stephen Mays, who was at the time the president of World Press Photo, said about the photojournalism category that it ceases to amaze him that 90% of the pictures that are presented are about 10% of the world. And I think that's a very interesting qualifying statement about the state of photojournalism, right? So having said that, I think one of the things that a lot of the students come to me for outside of working with the photographers who are dealing with critique and practice is, where can I read this critical theory stuff? You know, what can I do to get myself engaged? And there's, like I said, there's a wealth of information out there. And so one of the things that I always focus on is that there are certain genealogies of looking, that there are certain ways that certain cultures have been represented throughout the history of photography, and that photography is not always an ameliorative, right? Photography at its origins often was used to describe and implicate the other. And so one of the things that, you know, I really like to talk about with my students who do want to go to Haiti or they want to go to war zones is read the literature of the place, you know, listen to the music of the place, look at the art of the place, and it gives you a better sense of the culture, and you're also giving a voice to that population. And so again, I think, you know, one of the things I really advocate for within even my program at NYU is this close reading of theory. And interestingly enough, the bulk of my students are not photographers. In fact, most of my students want to work in archives, they're librarians, they work in history, or they want to become teachers. So I think that's sort of an important first step is realizing that photography is in fact an interdisciplinary sport, right? And the other part too that I find very interesting, having worked with Magnum, is that 90% of those Magnum photographers did not get photography degrees. They are historians, they are literature majors, they actually have degrees in education. A few are actual sculptors, but very few actually have photography degrees. So, you know, how did that come about, you know? And so that's sort of my approach to teaching is very much interdisciplinary. And, you know, I don't look at pictures, we don't do critiques, but I do oblige my students to understand how we came to this place in visual representation, right?
Do either of you want to respond to that question initially, or the next question is, which maybe either of you would want to think about or talk about, is Do you think teaching photography is still a legitimate field of study in this expanded field? Does anyone?
Go ahead.
As an artist, I use photography in my practice, but I'm not exclusively a photographer. And I do teach classes that my grad classes are more interdisciplinary, but my undergrad classes are photography. But personally, I have a pretty expanded idea of what that can be. And I'm most interested in the students finding a way to articulate their ideas and their ways of learning how to communicate their ideas. And so sometimes it will go a little bit outside of the realm of photography. It might include something that's time-based. But with thinking about, I was really surprised by learning this morning that my students who are all art majors, only one of them consider themselves to not actually be a photo. And some of the questions you asked, and I think one of these might be coming up, is it relevant? Like, and also I can't remember what your follow-up question is, but so to me that is interesting because we are an interdisciplinary program and we are teaching these interdisciplinary things, and I am teaching photography, but to be honest, I allow any students in there who I've built a relationship with, who, even though you're supposed to have a certain amount of classes, like if I see someone who is wanting to have a further investigation into their work, I'll put them in there as long as photo's something in their practice. I don't know if I'm answering that question or not, but I was surprised that was their attitude with it. I also teach on the opposite spectrum. I teach an intro to photo class where students are using digital cameras they need to have manual options, but it's really varied as to what they're doing. And it's a class that we created about 5 years ago for students to be able to take photography. We have such an interest in the college for students to take electives. Our darkrooms couldn't handle the amount of students, and we don't have a digital facility for our students. And so this was our way, and it's always changing. And all of this stuff is every semester is up for reevaluation, but they're taking a class where they don't have access to printing, they don't have access to cameras, and so. But with that, what can you do? You can still talk about how we see, how we talk about what we see, and how we create images, and all of that stuff is really, really important and actually quite rich without the base technology, which traditionally, like we have students going through photo 1, photo 2, color. We still have that, but then what do you do with the students who are really eager to take a photography class and might not be able to buy a SLR camera and all of those expenses? So we've tried to cater to what the students are able to afford.
Okay.
I think what I'd like to add to that is that, although seeing the work that's been created, leads me not to doubt that it was a worthwhile process. But, I also am constantly thinking about at what cost. And this is something that we also agreed to think about, which is the cost of all these programs, the cost of higher education, and the students being saddled with incredible debt, which, what can we do? Since we're employed and we're benefiting from all of these people going into debt, in a way, what's our responsibility? What can we do about that? When people ask me whether they should go into grad school, it's really the first thing that comes to my mind is, what are you going to have to do to pay for it? And therefore, which schools maybe should you think about? And, being well aware that certain schools are still highly privileging their students because of their reputation and they're really expensive and blah, blah, blah. And so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That maybe we should just go into this section, actually. I feel like it's been introduced, and I was going to go into image culture, but, why go there right now?
Yeah.
So what do you think about this? And I think this is a good question for the audience as well. Like, how do you approach this? Because we were talking statistics earlier. Yeah. About the education industry is supposed to surpass, if it has not already, credit card industry in terms of debt, like student loan debt. And what does that mean for us as professionals in this area? And there are something that I sent the three of them was this talk at this education panel at MoMA, which I'm not sure how many, it was maybe 2 months ago. And it was very much the sort of elite canon of photographic education. And there wasn't much discussion of that at all. Was there any? I don't remember any. And I think it's kind of important to think about that when talking about education, right? And say we teach in different institutions, like this is a private institution, you're teaching in a private institution. Magnum, are those workshops cost?
Oh, they cost.
They cost.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they cost. Got it. Becca teaches in a public institution, which is, I think, why you went into the stats, really.
Yeah.
And Alan, you're teaching at SVA.
I'm teaching
Pratt.
in a graduate program, an undergraduate program, and a one-year program.
Right. Pratt, SVA, and ICP?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how we want to talk about this, but you had
They're all expensive.
And they're all expensive.
And, you know,
Yeah, one of the points that I sent to the panel this morning, I think, was that I think that there were, I'm literally going to read my email because it was pretty good. So, you know, we said that there seems to be two forces at work, right? There's an increased number of photographers entering BFA and MFA programs with a hope/expectation that this will lead to work or a career in photography. So I think that's sort of the first thing. And then there's the secondary framework, which is that tuition dollars keep schools open and they keep faculty employed. And so I think that's the question that needs to be asked, not only of us as teachers, but of the administrations of these universities, to show how the need to have tuition dollars actually plays into the admissions process. The expansion of departments that may not have enough funding to do so. So students are not getting fellowships, they're not getting scholarships. I work, you know, in a university that is quite famous for saddling our students with a tremendous amount of student loan debt. You know, a lot of my students who are in Gallatin, for example, or in Steinhardt are graduating $100,000 in debt as 20-year-olds. And that to me is terrifying. So the question, I think, is, are we actually doing students a disservice by saddling them with a large student debt load and only to release them into a changing and difficult marketplace? I think that's a really tough question that I think needs to be asked of the educational community at large. With Magnum, the tuition for a one-week workshop is $1,350. Sometimes we work with partners such as Nikon, who give scholarships to undergraduate students to help alleviate some of the financial burden. But the question that a lot of students come into these workshops is what are my next steps after this? I need you to teach me what my next steps are. And so you have students of all kinds of career paths. And I recently had one gentleman who had shown in Paris, in Berlin, and in Tokyo pretty good solo shows. And his career just plateaued. And he wants to know, and funny, and I told the story to Janine, I was like, you know, and he walked up to me and he said, you know, Andreas Gursky just sold a print for $4.5 million, and that's my next step. How do I be that guy? And I actually think that's a question students are asking, right? And wearing my gallery hat, I always joke that I work in high-end retail, which I do. And, you know, and I get a lot of young students who approach me and say, you know, I'm graduating this year with a BFA from said university. You know, I'd love a solo show, and these are the prices that I'm thinking about with my prints, you know? So there's some sort of disconnect maybe with expectations, with maybe how we're selling our programs to students. And I think it's a really, really important question that administrations have to ask themselves, you know, more so than the individual educator. Because I'm certainly not getting NYU tuition dollars in my bank account, right? So.
And I guess then something that you were talking about, Becca, the idea of what are students getting, and how are we actually giving them skills to go out into the world? Like that's, I mean, I think this is important too. And you talked about that in terms of professional development, and we were talking about agency, and that I think is something important to say, because we have this larger socioeconomic construction in which we're operating as teachers, and yet what happens that actually is positive, and what are people being prepared for, and what can they transport out of that situation, you know? Do you feel comfortable talking about that a bit?
I'll talk a little bit, and I have something that I'm burning to say.
Go burn no more.
Which I'll say to anyone, any day, any time. But one of the things that drives me insane are unpaid internships. My students can't afford to work for free. And people say you serve your time and then you get inserted into the field. And it drives me insane because it's like, if you can't afford to work for free, then how are you going to get into the field? You can't serve your time. And it drives me nuts. And so if anyone in this room has paid internships that you want to talk to me about, I have amazing students. So anyway, I just needed to get that off my chest because I feel like that's one of the things. It's like, even like Janine was saying, and I'm not making generalizations about students at other schools because I realize the class difference is large and range is large within different schools and programs. But you were saying that like Parsons students come back and hire Parsons, like Parsons alums come back and hire Parsons students. And it's like, if you don't have that system generated, then it's problematic. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about via email and before meeting here are things we don't have the answers to. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. One of the things that I end up, and I question this because my only other full-time teaching experience was teaching in a small liberal arts school in Central Florida. And so it was a private school. And so it was very different because those students lived on campuses. Most of them, their parents were paying for their education. And if I told them to like watch a 3-hour film on a Friday night, they'd all be there. And so like it was a really different way of having access to students because for what I'm doing, it's like the 3 hours I have them a week, those are my 3 hours with them. And so I've had to think about how I use those 3 hours. And one of the things that I really do is I do locate people from my community really that I think have had different paths and will talk honestly. And when I bring someone to my class or we bring my students to them, I ask them in advance if they are able to answer or willing to answer any question. And this is like, how many dollars do you have in student debt? Did your parents help you out? Did you have a job? Like all of those things. Because for me, one of the things that's most powerful that I found is students identifying and hearing different paths. And like some of the stuff that my students said my teaching philosophy is it's really important for me to learn from these very, very specific paths that range. And so I think I'm just going to stop there for a second so I can cool down about the internships.
I think in classrooms, I think a lot about teaching people to care about something and teaching people to have agency as makers, as citizens, and to learn and understand the framework and understand the canon of photography certainly, and how they want to break that and change it, because there are no rules, right? In an expanded, in a sense, and the rules need to be broken, I think, that it's that kind of innovation that actually, if that can be something that's developed, I don't know if it can be taught, but it can be developed and fostered, and I think that's hopefully in some way the antidote to the situation, or not the antidote, but certainly a positive, you know, which is a miserable question that we're putting out about the economy, and yet what is it that we're all doing?
I think we also have to acknowledge how many students, you know, what is the current statistic, but it seems to me there's one that's over 90% of people coming out of these programs who don't make any more work after they leave, which I used to think of just completely tragically, and then, you know, of course I realized that people go on and do a lot of other interesting things. Photography is not the only thing in the world. But in terms of teaching, if you recognize that, you know, they're going to be doing, most of them, like a huge number of them, going to be doing something else other than working in photography, then this class ought to be doing something else, you know, at the same time. And preparing them in some other way than being so photo specific. And, you know, I think that for me, it seems like the chief value of a photo class is that photography is such a great specific tool to access the world and oneself, and that knowledge is extremely valuable. But also critical thinking and, you know, political engagement, you know, all these other things are also, you know, experiences that can be, people can be turned on to in those classes. I think a lot about what happens after, because I'm contacted constantly by people after, you know. I mean, I tend to be contacted by the people who are still doing photography, and they would like for me to look at their latest work or advise them about some photo issue. And that happens, you know, on a continual basis. My office hours are not with students I'm currently teaching, but with students I taught 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And, you know, and that's something that I used to figure out, how do I slot that into my schedule? You know, and now I have basically a day in which every week those are my office hours, but they're for students of the past. And
Alan, you're known as an incredibly generous former teacher, actually.
but I feel for them. I feel for the struggle. I care about that struggle. And, you know, and I'm really interested in all the ways in which further opportunities can be created for people, and mainly, I think lately in particular, in creating groups, because what the classroom is a group experience, and it's really hard to do that solo, isolated, on your own later.
Yeah.
So what can I do to create not just my one-to-one meeting with someone as a mentor, but how can I facilitate organic groups? And I think that's, you know, it's led me to a lot of nonprofit work. But also it's just something I'm interested in classes being designed for alumni, for people who have gotten to a certain level and are really committed, and they still need a group experience, and to meet more like-minded people who are similarly committed in another context. Because, you know, we have graduate degrees, but I don't think they're not any sort of continuing ed classes for people with MFAs or BFAs for that matter. Continuing ed classes are designed for people who are proficient in another field, and they're not going to leave that field, and they're doing photography on a kind of amateur basis.
Should we open this up now for other, we have these microphones floating about.
I just want to mention too that we have students here, and I would love to also hear from students who are present.
Absolutely.
Let us know about your student loan debt.
Or what you think you're getting from school.
Hi.
What you want to get from school. Yeah.
Here's a question.
So my question is, do you think the education you're giving, and thus the universities you're representing on this panel, is worth its cost?
Is anybody full-time faculty at NYU here before I answer that question? No, I'm kidding.
I think it is definitely worth it for some of my students who are fully engaged. And sometimes I have students that I wish they would take time off, or they would figure out why they're there. And so that they would be more worth it, I guess. I think about that range.
Part of my responsibility is also helping students find funding. And so within the college, there's actually this great thing called the K Scholarship, which part of the thing is like, apply for this. No, really apply for this. And so it pays their tuition for up to numerous semesters. And actually you can, once you're a K Scholar, you can get additional money. And so those students are actually, a lot of them are out-of-state students, and so it covers, like, it brings it down considerably so that they don't have to pay as much money. The amount is for in-state tuition. But so I try to do whatever I can to get them money to make it as cheap as possible. So in that case, yes, they're actually getting a bargain.
But, joking aside, with NYU and the department that I teach in, because it is interdisciplinary, and I think I'm very lucky. I love my department, and it is very much an activist department. Many of my full-time faculty have been very instrumental in the strike debt program, in Occupy Wall Street, and even the John Sexton 2024 plan, right? So, and there is certainly critical and intellectual rigor that is applied to the graduates of the Steinhardt, of this particular department. So I actually think that for what we do for our students as a department, it does enable a lot of students to go out into a variety of fields and do cultural work. Many of them return to school and do American studies or culture studies or library science. So I think that this interdisciplinary approach really works for our department. So that's just my department.
Penelope has a question.
Thanks. I wanted to speak to something that both Becca and Alan said. I hope this isn't going to sound awful, but your position against free internships, and then Alan saying, how much time you spend giving feedback to students that you're not being paid to do this. And I think that, when you make this statement about, well, no internship should be unpaid, it's a simplification of what internships are. I mean, some internships are different than other internships, and some people have no money who need help, and other people have more to give or more to offer. And so to make that a kind of, that you're not going to look at all your students that you've ever had for the rest of your life, but the ones that really need you and you can give them something, you will. And I think internships should actually be seen that way also, that,
Sorry, Becca and I spoke at length about this, and I don't think that's actually the critique.
They drive me nuts,
Yeah.
but I don't think that unpaid internship, I didn't mean to make a blanket statement even if I did.
then
But
I guess what happens is,
politically,
There's a
if,
class, yeah.
Absolutely. No, I understand
If
that.
everybody's doing unpaid ones, then nobody's going to do a paid one,
And then only the-
only the privileged will get to do.
So that's one end of
certain
it.
ones.
I totally agree. I understand that, but I also think that the response then to the no unpaid internships is then that people who actually could really learn a lot from somebody, but somebody that somebody doesn't have. So you have.
I also don't tell my students, don't do an internship unless you get paid. Like, if they are in a position where they can do that, but in general, it's something that I do notice as a concern, and more like the system that is set up is really frustrating to me. But it's not that I think
that would be the critique, is the system.
The critique is, that's what I meant to critique, is the system itself. And that answer of, like, you need to serve your time in order to get into the field. Like, that's the part that's...
But, it's worth noting, because I think there are a lot of artists who are extremely successful who have whole staffs of unpaid interns.
That's right.
And there's no pressure on them. There's no, because there's not enough of a conversation about why this is necessary.
And some of those internships, you see the students literally taking out trash and buying the photographer lunch. And so, New York City has actually been very good about redefining the guidelines of what an internship is. As Alan was saying, not a lot of artists apply those rules to how they use interns, but at Magnum, it's actually an amazing internship. Nobody's a full-time intern. You come in 1 or 2 days a week, but you actually get to work in the archive. You assist with the scanning. You look at all the distributions. You deal with the photographers one-on-one. So I think there is a value, but I do think that the critique Becca was making was really about the way that it stratifies students in terms of class and socioeconomic status.
I mean, I see some former students and current students in this room who I know have done internships, and some of them have gotten jobs from it, and that it's given them access in that stratification, because Parsons has an extremely healthy internship program, and it really puts students out into the field, and they benefit from that. it's a good, it's a good, it's a good thing in a structure which is problematic, right? So it's the individual.
Well, I mean, when you're getting credit, like you get credit for doing them at SVA, you are essentially paying for your internship. You're not just not being paid, you're paying.
You're going
to
into
do it.
debt to work for free.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, hi, just jump in. I think it's the perfect time, because I'm Assistant Director of Career Services for Development at SVA, and I used to be in that role at Parsons, and I've, graduated from MFA here at Parsons, so, and I teach at a CUNY school. I can talk to you guys all night.
We're all in big trouble.
I won't be that person.
You are all of us.
But when it comes to internships, it drives my colleagues and I absolutely nuts, because we're completely on board with what Becca is talking about, that it's a class issue, and there is a whole free labor issue that is, it is rampant in this country, and I think it's getting worse. And as much as my colleagues and I hate having students do internships, telling them to go out and get them, because 99% of them are unpaid. It's very few of them are as rewarding as this Magnum internship program sounds like. Unfortunately, it's a lot of trash and papers and filing and coffee. We're told by the people above us that we need to get those numbers up. They're disappointed when our numbers of interns are down. Because parents like to see that students are doing internships, because it equals success. So it brings in more money to the school, which means more students, which then the school the population outgrows the facilities, and as we've seen here at Parsons and other schools, we can't fit all the students. So it's the cyclical, huge problem that I think is way above us. But yeah, I've lost my train of thought. But when it comes to internships, I think it's something that, it's a double-edged sword. We tell our students, you should do this because you're going to possibly get a job from it, meet really great people, make great contacts that we encourage you to maintain throughout the rest of your life, and just using it as a networking opportunity, really. But it's an unfortunate reality of the situation.
And sometimes you can teach students how to do lighting, and then if they're on set working, and all of a sudden, like they're working for a photographer on set, on a job, and they're like, just da 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 da, and then they come back and they're like, wow, I learned so much in that one shoot, which is really fascinating. It's because it's just, it's
but it leads into my actual question for you guys, which is talking about, what are we teaching if photography is going away as a career, or if we know that 70% of the students are going on to not be photographers. And in my class at CUNY, I've found that I'm really teaching them how to learn and how to think, primarily. And then photography kind of comes after that, which maybe isn't my preference, but that's just the way it is, which I think is also a generational issue. So I would love to hear from all of you about your experience addressing those issues with students over the years, especially Alan, you've been teaching for a very long time, so if you've seen changes in how students need to learn.
Yeah, at a recent faculty meeting, Stephen Fraley said that they were considering at SVA creating ensuring that every graduating senior in photography had competence also in video. And I totally agree with that, because I think that so much work in documentary areas and event photography and all sorts of things that used to be letters are now video things being sent by organizations. I think practically that is a direction, that students that I've had are tapping into to support themselves more readily than doing still photography, or they need to do both. But really, people with competency in video and video editing, I think, have a good chance of, getting work right away. Because I think that need is developing all over the place hugely, whereas, photography jobs are in crisis. But that, yeah. So, not only that, I also find I keep trying to get people to do video, not because of that, not for those practical reasons, but because there's something about video now that I think is so open that, and I find that students, even though they're not even getting a course in editing, teach themselves and start applying it really quickly. But I just find it to be such a relevant tool to use right now to explore subjects and issues in a way that, I don't know, photography sometimes feels stale. Or I just think like video is opening doors for, I think, in a way, like beyond photography at the moment.
I think I feel that way about the digital image and the screen, and like vernacular uses of images, and that everyone's a photographer, and the citizen journalist, and we have all of these, like in the past 2 days, there's been all of these terms, and which, if students going through a photography problem don't understand the critical ideas of what it means to make images and the proliferation of images, then they have no chance.
Yeah.
And or that feels so primary to me. And in terms of thinking about that as a professionalization, when say, the still life photographer has fallen off, or fashion photography has fallen off. Photography as a distinct field in visual art, which already in itself is a rarefied economic field, is, like there are a lot of problems in there, which is not a direct step. It's like what you were talking about. What do I do next? How do I get out of the plateau? It's like, well, it's not that easy. So in terms of thinking and teaching, like I think an understanding of the current situation of images is the most important tool I could ever give. So, yeah.
You said something about teaching them how to learn. Was that the right thing? Because part of it is like, how do you teach them to be really active in their learning? And so for me, a big part of it is communication. So we're teaching about image making and having them articulate their ideas through visual means, but then also it's talking about their work and talking about each other's work. And so for me, it's a lot about learning how to talk and community build. And so a lot of what I do in the class, I went to the Evergreen State College. If you know what that is, you know that this informs my teaching. Interdisciplinary, no grades, no exams, no tests, show up if you want to type of education, but it's really student driven. So for me, building a community in the classroom where students from the second week are saying each other's names, talking to each other. I break them up into small groups. They're talking one-on-one about their ideas. And so that I match make them outside of class, so they need to Skype with each other or talk outside of class. Like I do as much as possible to build a community so that they're actually learning how to talk about their ideas and talk to each other. When we go on field trips to galleries, I pair them up so they have to have a dialogue, and then the next week they report to me what the other one said about the work. So what was so-and-so's favorite work? So it's like talking and keeping that going, because I feel like an important part of looking is being able to articulate what you're seeing and what you want to create. So that I do spend a lot of time doing, which I think is about how to learn.
Two of my seniors at SVA, I don't know if you're aware of this, have a radio show called Sad Sex, in which they talk about sex ed and dating and other issues. And they feel so much more confident in that arena than in class with their work, and that's really interesting to me. But I went on that radio show and participated in their competency, and it was really fun. And, now I want to podcast from home and have a midnight hour, talk show from my own apartment.
You should.
That would be good.
I have a question. I am a recent grad of UCLA. I studied photography, and I'm an intern at the Aperture Foundation in the education department. And I was wondering, at what point does a critical engagement with the student debt crisis and with the free labor that's happening in this country become a problem for you as employees of larger institutions?
How about when it collapses?
Yeah.
Or before, ethically, before it collapses, certainly. Yeah.
I asked this question because I recently read about an NYU professor who was fired for giving a harsh grade to a celebrity student.
Right. I read about that.
That's in Tisch.
You're free.
Oh, I didn't hear.
Yeah. Yeah, Tish. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, actually. Other than I think that institutions, and I keep coming back to the institution, institutions need to take a certain level of responsibility at a certain point and not say, it's just the economy, stupid. I mean, it's not the economy. It is a for-profit machine. But even outside of the university system, you know, if you go to the Google machine and you type in photography workshops, you will get page after page after page. And so there's a real industry that has emerged in photography, right? And all of it is based on a monetary exchange, right? So there's profiteers in photography. You know, I recently was sent, take this workshop. I'll teach you how to take the decisive moment. And I thought to myself, whoa, dude, you can't actually teach that. And it's something actually that HCB would have agreed is not teachable, you know? But there's, well, but this guy sells out workshops at $2,000 a pop, 5 times a year. So I think the question to be asked is, you know, what is the profit to be made of creating a cultural class of people? You know, and unfortunately, that is the meta question. It's really embedded in our priorities as a society. You know, I'm of Korean descent, and my cousin, who is getting her BFA in photography at Yonsei University, is going to school for free because Koreans believe in that higher education should be affordable. You know, I have Swedish friends who go to art school for free, right? You know, even in England, while all this stuff is still happening with tuitions being increased, it's far more affordable to go to Goldsmiths than it is to go to any school here in America, right? So I think that there has to be a cultural shift away from the profit of education and actually the benefits of education. And unfortunately, you know, I hate to be so cynical, but I don't know that we're going to solve that problem today. But I think it's about educators taking a stand at some point, right?
I just kind of wanted to jump in at that point about the relevance, going back to the relevance of what we're doing and building on what you're saying. And that I went to a private public school in Colorado, or private liberal arts school, not an art school, for my undergraduate degree, and then I went to Hunter for my MFA. Two were like the diametric opposite experiences, but what happened in those experiences was that I connected with teachers that changed my life.
Right.
And that made me want to be a teacher.
Right.
And so I think we're speaking about the present moment, which is very relevant, but I also want to think about the future of education and who are these people teaching photography or not teaching photography, and what is it that we're teaching. And the photographic education I got, which was circuitous throughout these sort of more liberal arts situations, which I think is a very relevant way to learn about art, is within the context of the other liberal arts, is that they instilled this love in photography for me that I can't shake and will never shake. And I want to have that for the students of the future, and who are these people that we're educating now? Are they going to become the photography teachers of the future, or are they going to be teaching something else, or what is that? I just think it's really important to know that a lot of us who are photographic educators in this room come from a real genuine place of a love for this medium.
Right.
And that we can never shake that, and that I want to, and I have students that I feel like I perpetrate that love for them, and then they bring it forward into the world. And maybe that's, I'm an idealist. I believe in community and all these things as well. So I don't want it to die. I don't want the photographic education to die. Of course, I think it has to change and be malleable within the context of what we're learning. But if we don't teach those fundamental things about it that made us all want to teach it,
right,
what does it become?
I want to say something very controversial, which is just because you love photography doesn't mean you have to be a photographer. I love photography so much, and I'm not a photographer. And I actually think that I do better work as a theorist of photography than as a photographer, right? So I think there's some real talk that has to happen between educators and their students, and say, here, the viability of you having Andreas Gursky's career is probably infinitesimal. Right? But there are plenty of careers within photography that are available and viable, right? Teaching. Yeah, like teaching, right? With sort of the emergence of digital photography, there's this sort of romanticization of old techniques, right? So now, you know, I actually was working on an exhibition and I needed to find a platinum printer. By the way, not very many people do platinum prints anymore, right? Somebody needs to take that up, by the way. I have work for you. You know, so it's about, you know, I did a talk with Bruce Davidson, and he said something really wonderful to a guy who raised his hand and said, you know, you did Brooklyn Gang when you were 26 years old. You were published in Esquire, and you've, you know, made the most beautiful photo books of all time. What advice do you have for me? And he said, get a skill. You know, one of my favorite photographers is Meatyard. He was an ophthalmologist, right? And he made pictures on the weekend. So your avocation doesn't necessarily have to be your vocation, but lucky is the soul who is able to marry both, you know? So maybe part of our service to our students is to tell them the truth.
And I actually feel ambivalent about photography. I don't think as a medium it really suits me. I've always felt ambivalent about it. But, you know, I'm passionate about dialogue. And so
Well, I don't necessarily consider myself a photographer. I consider myself an artist, and I teach all my students to be artists before photographers. We're sitting in a photography seminar, so obviously largely the conversation is about photography, but we're teaching them how to see and to talk about what they see, right? So whether or not what our preferences are really, like what is the context, what do we present, what is the university offering, who is the person teaching it? That's
yeah, I mean, I would, because I don't, you know, that even though I'm like so photo specific in the structure of the programs that I teach in, I'm kind of tired of photography. I'm tired of how conservative the field is in so many ways as an art form, and you know, the ambivalence of photographers towards art, my own ambivalence towards photography, all of that, you know, and yet I still feel like I can, like, I'm so into people and what they have to say and all of that. So that's the part that keeps me there, because I'm not so interested in, you know, technically how they got there as what they have to say. And
well, it seems like you really care about the individual, right? And you deal with them as an individual, and I think that's all we really have are these, we have this community, right? And we teach them to be there for each other. But if you don't connect in that way, and you have those very special connections with this very few students, and those people will go on to do something, whether it's ophthalmology or photography or whatever, that you lay that groundwork in their soul that's unshakable for them. And I don't want to lose that dialogue, and I don't know if that is relevant or too romantic or whatever.
Can I ask a question? Do you feel like you're talking about a canon, in a sense?
I think so.
Because photography is certainly marked by canons.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm curious about that. Is that a word that could be used in what you're trying to describe?
In terms of a canon, in terms of the idea,
the engagement, like an educational engagement with the field of photography.
Yes. I guess it's like something that I feel like photography has always had this conversation that any of us that teach it or history of photography have this whole dialogue of this fight that photography had to legitimize itself as an art form. And, you know, after the last few panel discussions, sort of the evolving of what that means up till now, and is it relevant in that way? And I believe that it is. I think it can change, but it's a department. It is something. Mm-hmm. It's not nothing. And it doesn't mean it's not art, and there's all these different genres within it. I feel like the relevance, like how could we even ask if it's relevant? Mm-hmm. It's definitely relevant. Yeah.
I guess
right?
I'm thinking that, you know, I think it's important, and I would like to be reminded to think of a value within that teaching experience, you know, that's beyond anything technical or medium specific, you know, that it's learning, and what is that? You know, what are the values that are not about the product as much as, you know, I feel like these photographers that I showed are highly aware of a finished result and having it, you know, have a certain impact. But I think we have to remind ourselves constantly about what the other values are besides product, and, you know, buying into that whole idea.
don't create more teachers, what is that? What does that do? I mean, I don't know. Just putting that out there.
Does anyone have any comments? Oh, go, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I have a question. Partly we've been dealing with higher education, and I came into education photography. Partly I taught with Alan in Hell's Kitchen with 7th graders, and most of them, held the camera for the first time, and it gave them a way to interact with their neighborhoods in a way that they would be viewed positively, which many of them were not as they went around the neighborhood. And I was wondering if anyone else here is dealing with middle school or high school students, and I thought of your comment about the platforms that the youth are on now of the steady stream of images. And I used to teach on the Lower East Side as well, and I just found the fascination with the camera or the thing is they don't care anymore. They all have it in their pocket. They're streaming, they're taking pictures of themselves. The little magic of the Polaroid is gone, of, oh, you have this thing that you made that you can take home. Is anyone else teaching or trying to figure out how to teach with the flow of all of them digesting and posing, as opposed to how we taught before?
Well, my door to photography actually opened when I was teaching at University School in California, and they had a bunch of cameras that were given to the school to kind of open kids up to actually seeing the world, and no one knew how to process film or anything. I had no art school background whatsoever. And I said, this seems cool, I'm going to try this. So I took a course at UC Berkeley on processing film. It was a disaster in terms of technical, but I got what I needed to do, and we actually started to explore with the camera with kids, but it opened my eyes in such a way that I ended up coming to New York, going to Pratt, getting an MFA, and teaching. But it was a really interesting door opener. But what the kids did was just kind of remarkable, really, because it was so, like, I guess Lartigue, where there was no preconceived sense of design. You just were doing it. And that's really how it was for me when I first started. There was no art school training, because I really believe the most important thing really today in what I teach is to give students a real skill set to go out. I mean, I know what it's like to go out, have a student loan, pay it off. I mean, no way do I, and my professor said, wait tables. No, thank you. I wanted really to be able to, my commitment to students is to really practically take this knowledge, be excited about it, and know that you can use this. So that's kind of my attitude about what I do when I teach. And teach kind of my whole course has changed in such a way in terms of photography has changed so much. Anyway.
Are there other, I wonder if, yes, there's a question in the back. Laurel?
I just had a really geeky question. I've been reading photo theory with my students for the first time this semester, and I was wondering if each of you could comment about what text you think is the most important to teach in the context of photography.
Ooh.
I have a ready one. I love this series, Documents of Contemporary Art. They keep coming, they're anthologies on certain subjects, like the cinematic, ruins, situation, and they keep coming out fast. And I think those are terrific. Yeah, it's Documents of Contemporary Art, and each one has an editor, and they're anthologies of critical writing on certain subjects, and from the cinematic to ruins or the archive.
Camera Lucida. I think everybody should read Camera Lucida. Everybody, period. But I actually don't use a photography textbook. Most of my readings come from articles and critical theory, but we sort of do a trajectory of Benjamin to Alan Sekula to, contemporary writers about the archive, because that's my personal interest. But I do think that some of the most interesting sort of theoretical points, and a lot of the people that I continue to read, like Jeff Batchin, Ariel Azoulay, who spoke here, Gillian Rose, they're all sort of in some way responding to the main points of camera lucida, whether it's ideas about memory and counter-memory and how actually photography blocks memories from happening. I think that's really important stuff for people to read. And so I would say that I actually think camera lucida is the defining photography text for me.
I would agree and add in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. You
can't get around.
It's canon. It's canon, and it's I can't I try to throw in the contemporary, like Hito Steros, written such amazing articles about like image culture, and that feels so important. And then it depends on the context. I mean, sometimes I give literature. It depends on the class.
Yeah.
Like there's sometimes I give literature, like poetry, but yeah.
W.J.T. Mitchell's What Do Pictures Want is also super good, because he talks about how there was a linguistic turn in the 18th century, right, and everything was text-driven, and how in the 20th century there's a pictorial turn, and that the language is a common language of images, right? Also, a lot of the stuff I read comes from American studies and cultural studies, so Marianne Hirsch and Leo Spitzer, who are up at Columbia, do a lot of stuff about memory and post-memory, and specializing in Holocaust photography. But I think that how we make meaning of photographs is really important. And one of the things that I think is really important in the education of a photographer is a generosity towards their viewers. And I experience as a curator a lot of work where without reading the 10-page artist statement, these pictures don't mean anything to me. And I think that there has to be a certain generosity to your viewer and a certain respect for their intelligence and what they're coming to your pictures with, right? Sorry, off topic again. Yeah.
I'm going to go off topic too, because there's some talk about education, and one of the things that I do within the MFA programs that we have in our department is I actually teach a class on teaching, because one of the things is I realized through my undergraduate education that was one of the important things that I took, was a class on actually discussing teaching. And so for me, reading Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks, that's something that, because I teach this class, I have to read it every year, and it's a really great thing for me to read as an educator every year, and I find it's really important for MFA students to read in order to think about educating as well.
Any remaining questions? Getting close to our end here. If there are no more questions, I will thank Janine for moderating this panel, and also to thank Song, Becca, and Alan, for participating.
Yeah, and thank you for
on the
organizing.
panel.
Thank you for listening.
Arthur, thank you for organizing this entire conference.
Thank you, Arthur.
I also just want to take a moment to thank all of the speakers who came over the last 2 days. Some traveling from very, very long distances. I also would like to thank my collaborators on this organizing this event: Pamela Tillis from the New School for Public Engagement, Sarah McNear from the Aperture Foundation, also the work scholars who are here, who have been here all day and all day yesterday, selling the great books that Aperture produces. Karen Quoney and Naomi Miller from the Vera List Center for Art and Politics. My colleague Janine Olsen, who helped me in organizing this conference. My student helpers, Erica Min, Eileen Song, Jonathan Trevino, Amy Buckley, and Esther Jane. Thank you all for coming, and we will do this again in 2 years.
Great.